Oh, hey there. Thanksgiving week is my favorite week of the year. That's right, I said week, because for me, Thanksgiving is not just a one-day affair. This year, I will be making Dad's Thanksgiving stuffing, which is more of a dressing really, but we'll get into that. Stay tuned. I think I'm going to do a little bit of a different approach to it. It's probably going to be a longer format, and the audio is going to be as it happens. So tell me what you think. Let's get into it. I'm Chase W. Beck. I have a PhD in anthropology. Join me as we learn about the different ways food and culture intersect on Dr. Beck's Epicurean Delights. All right, it's recipe time. Today we're going to be making Dad's Thanksgiving stuffing. You need a large onion. You need bread for the stuffing. Now in the past I have made my own sourdough bread, but today I will not be doing that. There's another bread, just in case. You need sausage. I've got, like 2 pounds here? Yeah, 2 pounds of sausage. You need celery. My father always put in some cilantro. Don't ask me why. I put it in anyway. We need some walnuts, fresh cranberries, grapes. One of the cool things about this recipe that I love is that it is full of lots of fruit. So as much fruit as you can get. So we got red grapes, we've got white grapes, we've got apricots, we've got dried sweetened cranberries. I know we got fresh cranberries in here, but we're also putting in dried sweet cranberries as well. We're going to add an apple, some pine nuts, and a little splash of white wine. My father always used this dusty bottle of German plum liqueur, which I cannot get. But I found that a nice Chardonnay gives you pretty much the same effect. This is all going to be held together with some turkey stock. We would make our own turkey stock every morning, every Thanksgiving morning from the giblets. We'd add water to the giblets and then cook them, cook all the flavor out, and use that liquid to bind together the stuffing. I don't have my turkey yet. I don't have my giblets yet, but I did roast a turkey a couple weeks ago, and I took that carcass and I put it in my Instant Pot and I cooked it down, and now I have this nice foamy stock. And then also, one of my father's secret ingredients that he always used with an abundance of love is a little bit of butter when you're cooking the aromatics. So let's get started. All right, I need to start drying out my bread. Now you could leave this out overnight, but I don't want to wait that long. So I am going to get it going really low in the oven. So get that oven on, just something below 200 degrees, however low your oven goes. I'll put mine on 170, that's the lowest it gets. And then we're gonna try to remove the crust on these bad boys. So I'm just gonna cut down the crust here, and I'll probably use the editing feature on my editing software and edit a lot of this out so you don't have to watch it. But for now, I'm in front of the screen, and so I'm going to talk. Doop-de-doop-de-doo. Cutting down the bread. So once I have all the edges off the bread, or almost all the edges off the bread, I'm going to cut it into little squares. In the past, I have made my own bread, and when you make your own bread, you can make the squares as big or as small as you want. Today, I did not take the time to make my own bread, so I'm at the whims of the slicer at the local H-E-B. I tried to get loaves that were unsliced. I thought I had ordered unsliced loaves, but lo and behold, the sliced loaves were in my car when I picked up the order today. So, I have to do a little bit better slicing these bad boys so that they are less of a plank and more of a square. I don't know. They made them awfully thin. That's one of the things I'm not super happy about, is how thin they are. Anyway, we're gonna have a lot of leftover crust, so I'm gonna have to figure out something to do with that. Any ideas what to do with leftover crust? Crust ball fight. I could definitely make breadcrumbs and then use it in all the basic breadcrumb applications. I could use it for a fry batter to fry things. Just have to wait and see. So the reason why this is my father's Thanksgiving recipe, Dad's Thanksgiving stuffing. I remember waking up as a kid early in the morning before the sun came up on Thanksgiving morning and helping my father in the kitchen make this Thanksgiving stuffing so that we could get the turkey on. So we would always, in those days, stuff the turkey with the stuffing, which you're not supposed to do anymore. The worry nowadays is that your turkey will be undercooked, or the stuffing will be undercooked. It'll absorb all these bacteria from the turkey, and so when you take it off after cooking it for hours, it'll still have bacteria inside of it and you'll get sick. Now, we never got sick, so I don't know why we have to start worrying about it now. However, the main thing that caused me to change my mind about stuffing the turkey was that if you don't stuff the turkey actually cooks faster because it's not full of stuffing that also has to come up to temperature. So if you think about it, the stuffing's on the inside, and so it's going to be the last thing to obtain that proper done temperature. The last place where bacteria will reside in the turkey will be in the stuffing, because that's the last place in the center of the turkey that's going to reach the proper temperature to kill all that bacteria. So that means that the turkey will be done long before the stuffing is finished. And if you wait around for the turkey to be cooked, if you wait around for the stuffing to be cooked, by the time the stuffing is at a temperature that's safe to consume, then the turkey is overdone. You have a dry, chewy turkey. And nobody likes that on Thanksgiving. Nobody wants to eat a dry, chewy turkey on Thanksgiving. So, once that argument was made, I could see why it might be okay to remove the turkey or the stuffing from the turkey. And I guess if you're not stuffing the turkey with it, you no longer call it a stuffing because it's not being stuffed. It is now a dressing. So this is my turkey dressing. Anyway, my father and I would get up early in the morning and we would prepare this. And I never actually knew where my father got this recipe. And I should say now that we don't really have a whole lot of measurements for this recipe because we always eyeballed everything. And it would be like me adding some grapes and I'd say, Dad, is this enough grapes? And he'd say, no, add more grapes. And then he would add the cranberries or the craisins, the sweetened cranberries. And he'd say, Chase, is this enough cranberries? And I'd say, no, add more cranberries. You need more cranberries in there. So it was sort of a back and forth, us coming to a mutual understanding of the proper ratio for everything in the stuffing. And I think part of it is personal preference, you know, like he might like more craisins and I might like more apricots. Regardless, it was a fun little activity that we could do together on Thanksgiving morning. My father was always in charge of the turkey, and he always cooked it outside on the grill, which doesn't sound like that big of a feat until you realize that this was in northwestern Ohio in the middle of November, out in farm country where the winds could sometimes come roaring across the now empty farm fields and suck all the heat out of your Weber grill, your tiny Weber grill. And so you'd have to sit around and try to come up with ways to keep that grill from cooling off so much that it would take all day for the turkey to cook. And that's probably one of the reasons it became more valuable to remove the stuffing from the turkey, because then we didn't necessarily have to get up before the sun came up in the morning. We could make the stuffing whenever we wanted to because the turkey could go on. And then also we did notice the turkey cooked a lot faster once you remove that stuffing. And then also he'd be devising these various wind breaks to block that wind, to keep the wind from sucking the heat out of the grill. Gosh, I've got maybe 1.5 loaves here. I think that might be a good place to stop. Hopefully that'll be enough crust or enough crumbs to make up the bread portion of the stuffing. It looks like I've got a lot here. Now these guys are going to absorb all the moisture, which is why we have to drive the moisture out of the liquid. And then as they absorb the moisture in the liquid, they're going to pick up flavor. So it's very important that you start with these nice dry breadcrumbs because you want them to be flavored by the broth and everything else in there as they cook. All right, I'm gonna stick these guys in the oven and I'll be back with you after that. All right, so I'm gonna get the sausage in the pan on the stovetop so we can brown the sausage. This is just regular breakfast style pork sausage. Back where I'm from, we always used Bob Evans. But Bob Evans is not popular down here, so I have to use Jimmy Dean. And it's almost indistinguishable. I honestly couldn't tell you the difference. I think in a taste test, I probably would lose in trying to differentiate between the two flavors of breakfast sausage. So I figure whatever you can get. Maybe one of these days I'll get so fancy that I'll be making my own breakfast sausage. Who knows? Put that in there for now. Just because I don't remember where to put it. You know, it never fails. One package is incredibly easy to open, and the next package is impossible. Here we go. Almost. There we are. Might not need all this sausage, but you never know. I'm going to make an extra large batch for the in-laws. And hopefully they'll like my stuffing, my father's stuffing. And if they don't, well, I'll just bottle it up deep inside and hold it against them for the rest of my life. All right, I'm gonna wash these porky hands and then get this on the stovetop. So this is ready to go. I'll get this on the stovetop. I want it on a medium heat. Medium high. It's not necessarily important as long as you keep an eye on it. We want to get this onion chopped up. It doesn't need to be super fine. This is going to cook on the stovetop for a little bit. And that'll break down some of the cellular structure of the onion. So by the time it cooks on the stovetop and then makes its way into the stuffing, there really won't be a whole lot left of the onion itself in the final dish. Either texturally or flavor-wise, it'll have distributed its flavor throughout the entirety of the dish. And so we probably won't have a big old issue with it, but still gonna do my best to make sure We got a tasty onion. And because I'm doing a lot of bread, a lot of pork, I'm going to do a lot of onion. So there are certain aspects of this recipe that we have experimented with, and it's one of those recipes that doesn't always stay the same year after year, but there are aspects of this recipe that we absolutely never mess with. My father, during the time when he first started making this, he was always worried about the sage content. He would talk about how back when we were buying our stuffing, the breadcrumbs, the bread cubes, I guess they would have been. He was always checking the back to make sure that they hadn't added sage, because you get a lot of sage from the sausage as well. And so he was always worried about getting too much sage. He didn't want the sage in the dish to be overpowering so that everything tasted like sage. So often if we bought seasoned breadcrumbs, he would make sure that there wasn't any sage in the seasoning, or we would just buy unseasoned breadcrumbs. A lot of the flavor, a lot of those savory flavors come from the sausage itself. So I've got my onions all cut up here. There might be a couple of large hunks of onion left, but they're going to cook down, like I said, and it won't be that big of a deal in the final dish. And, this is Thanksgiving. This is family Thanksgiving, so it's going to be a little bit rustic. If they want something perfect, I guess I could take more time and do it, but this is just one of those things where imperfections make the dish, in my opinion anyway. It's kind of like when you're sitting down to a nice big bowl of clam chowder, and you take a bite and you get a little clamshell. Well, that's how you know it's real clam chowder. If the onions, the diced onions, looks too perfect, then everybody will be like, there's no way that Dr. Beck made this. Dr. Beck isn't that good of an onion chopper. So I'm making sure that there's a little element of me in here so that people still know that it's my father's Thanksgiving stuffing. All right, let me get that celery. So we have almost a mirepoix here. We've got onions, we've got celery, but you do not put carrots in this dish ever. That's one of those sacred things. I said there's a lot of elements of this dish that you don't really have to worry about. Well, the addition of carrots is one of those sacred things that you must not do under any circumstances. So celery, yes. Carrots, no way. Now, my father said he got this recipe from a German chef, and it was a goose recipe, but I don't really buy that because he was always so insistent that cilantro go into this dish. And, that just doesn't seem like a German thing to me. I could be wrong. My knowledge of German cuisine is limited, I'll admit. Regardless. And that might have been an addition of my father's own, the cilantro. It's really funny that he puts cilantro in this, in my opinion, because it is chopped incredibly tiny. He really minces it up by hand. He goes over it over and over and over again to make sure that it's blended well. You might as well stick it in a blender or a food processor until it turns into mush. Although he would always do it by hand with a knife. And then also he cooks it, which a lot of the flavor in cilantro is very heat sensitive. So once you've cooked cilantro, and I've tested this out myself, that flavor of cilantro almost entirely disappears. I also know there's a lot of people who are sensitive to cilantro that don't like the flavor at all because they find it soapy. So if you're one of those people, I would say you could probably leave it out in this recipe and it would never bother you. You could even substitute in some parsley, although I think the flavor of the parsley is probably going to withstand some of that heat in ways that cilantro does not, the cooking process. On the topic of sausage, which I was speaking about before, I always liked adding a little bit of spicy sausage, but that's not tradition. And one of the things you have to realize is that there are a lot of people who are going to be eating this dish, and in order to satisfy all of them, sometimes sacrifices must be made. I know on a couple occasions when we were doing 2 pounds of sausage, I was able to get away with using 1 spicy pound and 1 regular pound of sausage. But someone would invariably notice and say, "Is this spicy sausage?" And I would say, of course it is. Spicy sausage is delicious. But that independent spirit in me has been smothered over the many years of making this dish for my family for Thanksgiving. And now I no longer try. Can't get away with adding any spicy sausage anymore. So I think this is about the amount that my father has. He might add like double this. I know that I've made this dish at my aunt's house a couple of times when we would spend Thanksgiving with her and her family. And she is one of those people that really doesn't like cilantro. I imagine that she is one of those people that has that gene that causes cilantro to taste super strong and super soapy. So when she would say, "Hey, make your stuffing," and she'd say, "Give me a list of all the stuff you need," and I would give her the list, and I'd be making the stuffing at her house, and I would say, "Where's the cilantro?" And she'd sheepishly hand over just the smallest sprig of cilantro, or a couple of sprigs, and she'd say, "Here you go," and I'd say, "What? This is like a quarter of what I need. This isn't even half of what's supposed to go in the dish." But anyway, we would make it and nobody would complain, and it's just as good. I honestly think that when you cook the cilantro down as much as this recipe calls for, you might as well not be adding cilantro at all. But it does look nice. It does add a couple of, dots of greenery. It's real bright, sort of festive, holiday-like. I'd love to find a study about the prevalence of cilantro sensitivity in cultures where cilantro is served on almost everything. Do those people just learn to deal with it? Or are there fewer people with cilantro sensitivity in those cultures? That might be something worth checking out. And then also, I would love to see a study where they investigate the level of cilantro sensitivity to cooked cilantro versus raw cilantro. See if there's any relationship there, if that soapy taste that everybody complains about so much is maintained for them once it's cooked, or if the soapy taste is destroyed by the heating process as well. I think we're almost getting to the amount of chopping of the sort of proper size for the cilantro that my father would require for the dish. I just remember he would go over it over and over and over again and work very hard to get all of his cilantro chopped down as small as possible. He would chop it down so much that it would stain whatever he was chopping it on, so all the chlorophyll was definitely coming out of the leaves themselves. I just can't imagine this getting much more finely chopped, but I also remember my father going over this over and over and over again as much as possible to try to get that cilantro really, really chopped down real fine. I remember we were using cilantro back up in northwestern Ohio when nobody knew what cilantro was. Now it's a dish it's an ingredient, it's a vegetable herb that everybody's familiar with. But back when I was a kid, it was something exotic. And you could say, hey, what's in this? You'd smile and you'd say, cilantro. So we're back to the sausage. Here it is cooking on the stove top. It is done, but we're trying to evaporate some of the liquid in there still to get a little bit of browning on the meat. It'll probably lose a lot of its crispiness when we cook it in the stuffing, because there's going to be a lot of liquid coming from the fruits. So any of the crispiness that we're developing now will just be flavor that will diffuse through the dish. The sausage is really good at becoming these like little pockets of salty flavor in the stuffing. So that's just about finished. I did turn up the stove just a little bit to help speed up that evaporation of all the liquid in there. I have stirred the bread once or twice now. It's drying out. It should be just about ready in another couple of minutes. I want to get some of the juices and the fat that are cooking out of the sausage, so I'm going to strain it through this sieve. That will allow me to use any rendered fat out of the pork to cook all the onions and the celery and the cilantro. One of the things I don't remember about this recipe is if it's supposed to be equal amounts of onions and celery, or if it's like twice as much onions as celery. So we'll just do our best here and see what happens. So I won't be making this for my family this Thanksgiving because I'm spending this Thanksgiving with my in-laws, which will be nice, but I will not be able to share this with all my family members that know it or are familiar with it from their past. So not everybody in my family loves it, but there are some people there who do ask for it every year, and I know that they're going to miss it. We'll see if my family members who don't get it this year will watch this video, and I'll be able to say, now you know how to make it yourself, and you'll be able to do it without me. I have had some family members who watch my episodes, and they'll respond to me, oh, that looks so good, send it to me in the mail, or come to my house and make it for me. And I say, well, the purpose of me making the videos is so you don't have to have me come over. You can make it yourself. And they always say, well, it's so much better when you make it. So I guess it really doesn't matter. If you're not willing to make it yourself, then you're just going to have to keep on relying on me, I suppose. So I'm going to get these onions and celery on the stove top here. There they are. Giving them a quick stir. They're cooking down. We're not really trying to brown them. We're just going to sweat them a little bit. We want the onions to turn nice and translucent. We want them to get softened up, so there's no longer a crunch in the celery. I think this looks like a good distribution of celery. And once this cooks down a little bit more, I will add the cilantro. You could probably add the cilantro right at the very beginning, but because it's chopped up so much finer than the onions and the celery, I don't really want to cook the cilantro so early that there's any chance that it burns. I'm going to add some butter, but I think I'll save this stick for another episode. So now that we have the onions and the celery cooking down, I'm going to add the cilantro and let it cook down a little bit more. There it all goes. Make sure we're not wasting any of that precious cilantro. It's like 28 cents a sprig, 28 cents a bunch. What's the classification? Who knows? Yeah, I didn't buy organic. So I'm strongly tempted. Every single fiber of my cooking knowledge is telling me not to overcook the cilantro, that if I cook it too much, then all that cilantro flavor is going to be lost. But that's not the tradition of this dish. That's not how it's prepared. We always cook the cilantro down until there's like no cilantro flavor remaining. I'm not really sure why that's the way we do it. It's just a good example of how tradition defies logic. So I'm just going to go with it. Go with what we've always done. I am going to add a little bit of turkey stock to this here. That'll help the vegetables soften up, and they'll also pick up some of that flavor. The flavor of the stock will infuse through the vegetables, or at least that's what I'm hoping for. It'll also help me deglaze the pan. I'm using the same pan that I cooked the sausage in because it's full of that sausagey flavor, and this will allow me to pick up some of that flavor from the little crumbly bits stuck in the bottom of the pan. The turkey stock I made from a turkey breast that I smoked on the grill, so there's a little bit of smoke flavor in the stock itself, but I don't think it's going to be overwhelming in the final dish. One of the things that happens to me when I'm making this dish is I'll have all the grapes and the apricots cut up, and people will come into the kitchen, they'll start stealing little bits here and there. They'll steal the sausage, or they'll steal some grapes, and I'll say, like, every single little bit you steal now is part we're not going to get later, so why are you stealing it now? It's going to throw off all the proportions of everything. Cooking is as much of a science as it is an art, and so when you have everything measured out in the proportions that it needs to be, you can't just start stealing little bits here and there, but it's just the way it is. Nobody ever seems to care. I think that I'm going to flip my cutting board over so that I have the non-cilantro up side. The non-cilantro side is up so that when I start chopping up all the fruit, they're not going to pick up any of that raw cilantro flavor. I'm going to put lots of different fruits in here. And what we would do when we'd originally assemble this is we'd try to find all the fruits in the house, all the dried fruit we had hidden away in the pantry, the raisins and the currants, and we would add them into the dish, and it would just add this brightness of flavor, this sweetness. And we'd also use like apples, which is a very like fall flavor. So it seems like every couple of years we try adding something else. I know one year we tried to add oranges, which you would think would be a great addition to this recipe, but once you cooked them, they got really bitter, and so it wasn't a great idea. I've added quinces in the past, and that works out really well, but once you cook a quince up, it kind of just starts tasting like an apple. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. Sometimes we mess around with which nuts we use. I know some years I add persimmon, and that seems to work out really well. I don't think I had too many complaints that year. Let me just wipe off my knife here before I attack this apple. Yeah, there we go. We're aiming for a bite-sized piece of apple here, or something that will allow you to get more than one thing on the fork or spoon when you're eating this. So I'm going to try to cut these up a little small. Now this gets harder when you have a larger apple because you have to cut it more. That's about as large as you would ever want your pieces to be, and you'll see here as I'm going through that I'm going to end up cutting some of the pieces even smaller. Just going over them again. We probably won't use the whole apple. This is a rather large apple, and there are a lot of fruits that are going to end up in here. I would like to add a couple of colors of apples, but I only have this one here today. So we'll just use this one, and I'm going to use multiple colors of grapes. It's more about like visual appeal, but also you're going to get different flavors from all the different fruits you're adding, like green apples and red apples don't taste the same. White grapes and red grapes don't taste the same. So it's sort of like building layers into the dish or elements of surprise. We never peel the apple. I think that just goes to the rustic appeal of the dish. I guess it's more of a textural thing to leave that peel on. My personal contribution to this dish, and something that's never going to leave, is apricots. I would always throw in apricots. I would think that if you wanted to add citrus, I know that we had those oranges that didn't work out. You could probably add some citrus zest. If you zest the citrus, not the whole peel, not the pith, just the zest. And then maybe some of the juice of a citrus fruit might work out as well. You might be able to use candied citrus peel, but I would worry it would end up tasting too much like a fruit cake. Yeah. You're going to end up getting a real fruit cakey nature to the final dish if you add too much of that stuff. Yeah, when we first started out, I remember adding a lot of raisins. We don't use so many raisins this year or this time. I think if I had some raisins, I would probably lean more towards golden raisins than the dark ones. Maybe one of these years I will throw in cherries. I've probably used cherries in the past, dried cherries. I think it's a good addition, but not necessary. I have a lot of dried cherries because I'm planning a upcoming episode with a dish that requires dried cherries. I like to throw in dried cherries into a lot of my recipes, especially my cookie recipes. I think that especially if the dried cherries come from Michigan, it's a good way to make them more of a personalized dish for me. I think nowadays we don't use raisins so much because we added the craisins, and craisins or sweetened dried cranberries were not something that was available when we were using raisins. And I think nowadays the craisins or the sweetened dried cranberries sort of overshadows the raisins. But I think like in future years, if there was any difficulty in getting a lot of these ingredients, we would go back to using raisins. It's almost impossible to screw this recipe up because of its amorphous nature, and it's not super finicky, and so it almost always comes out right. Or at least if it comes out wrong, nobody bothers to tell me. Maybe they don't want to hurt my feelings. I don't know. We don't really measure anything, so it's just like adding just enough. And the technique is finding the proper ratio. And what we're looking for when I'm looking into the bowl is the ability to see all the fruits that have been added at the same time, like speckled throughout evenly. I'm having difficulty getting into the bag of cranberries here. We may never get in. We might have to give up, have Thanksgiving next year. There we go. Did we get there? Did we get there? Yeah, we made it. Woohoo! We're going to get sweetened dried cranberries this year. Now I need to add the fresh grapes and the fresh cranberries. It's interesting. The cranberries are quite tart and can be sort of a surprise when you bite in there. And they can be a challenging flavor. The addition of fresh cranberry speaks to the range of flavors you're going to get in this dish. We don't steer away from very tart things. Everything's invited. Sort of like Forrest Gump's box of chocolates of Thanksgiving stuffings, in that you take one bite and you might get something sweet and delicious, and you take another bite and it might be full of coconut. And we don't actually add coconut to the dish. Ideally, the cranberries will cook down and mellow out in the dish, and they will absorb some of the sweetness and some of the savoriness of other things and distribute their tartness throughout. Cranberries are an interesting fruit in that they're a very American fruit. They're grown in eastern North America in these areas that are cranberry bogs, and as they're grown, they're in these large fields, and the fields are maintained in such a way that they can flood the fields, at which point the cranberries are supposed to float and allows them to skim them off the top. Another interesting aspect of cranberries is that they bounce, and this is used in order to test them for their suitability to be used in as fresh cranberries. As they're moving down this conveyor belt, they're dropped multiple times. They have to as they drop, they have to bounce over a barrier like 7 or 8 times, and each time it bounces over, it makes it on to the next round. And if it misses on the last time, so it can bounce like 6 or 7 times and make it every single time, and it misses like the 7th or the 8th time, it gets shoved off to the side and made into jelly or something like that, which is very delicious. I really love cranberry jelly, but it just means it doesn't make it into the bag of cranberries. Every once in a while, you'll get a cranberry in the cranberry bag that's a little bit soft, but I just assume that it went soft after it made it into the bag, not before. Otherwise, how could it make it over all those drops? So I'm mixing up the bowl now, and I'm going to look to see how they're distributed, see if I need to add anything else that's not in there already. The grapes aren't in here, so I'll have to get on that here pretty soon. You never measure anything, so I can't say, oh, you need a half cup of this and a quarter cup of that. It comes out to about a half of an apple. Maybe all your other fruits should be about the same volume as the apple. I don't know. I'll probably wash these grapes and turn the camera off before I do that. Let me get this cranberry that almost got away. He gets to be part of the party.